Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another journey into the skies of history. Today, we uncover a story Britain never expected: the rise of the P-51 Mustang, a plane that not only changed the air war in Europe, but became the symbol of Allied air dominance. When World War II erupted, Britain faced a desperate struggle for survival. The Royal Air Force had held the line in the Battle of Britain in 1940, but the fight was far from over. The skies of Europe remained a deadly battleground, and Britain urgently needed modern aircraft capable of matching and surpassing Germany's deadly fighters. At the start of the war, the RAF relied heavily on the Supermarine Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane. Both were iconic machines, but by 1941, the Luftwaffe's new fighters, especially the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190, began to dominate the skies. Britain needed reinforcements, but building new planes fast enough was a daunting challenge. Here is where the story takes a surprising twist. A twist Britain never expected. Across the Atlantic, a little-known American company named North American Aviation was about to change everything. In 1940, Britain approached them with a request: build fighters for the Royal Air Force. At first, Britain wanted North American to produce the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk under license. But the designers at North American boldly offered something different. Instead of building an older model, they promised to design an entirely new fighter from scratch and have the prototype ready in just 120 days. It was a gamble, and Britain had no idea how far-reaching that gamble would be. The result was the North American NA-73X prototype, which would soon evolve into the legendary P-51 Mustang. At first, however, nobody believed it would become a game-changer. The early Mustang, equipped with the Allison V1710 engine, performed well at low altitudes but struggled at high altitude, the very place where the air war was being fought over Europe. The RAF tested the Mustang in 1941 and 1942. While impressed with its speed at low levels, they dismissed it as unsuitable for high-altitude combat. Britain used it mainly for reconnaissance and ground attack missions. To them, the Mustang was just another aircraft, useful but not revolutionary. But fate had other plans. By 1942, American bombers, the mighty B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, began daylight raids deep into occupied Europe. The problem? They had no fighter escorts that could reach all the way to Berlin and back. German fighters ripped into these bomber formations, inflicting catastrophic losses. American bomber crews, once flying on near-suicidal missions, now had the protection of swarms of Mustangs. Losses dropped dramatically, while German fighters were forced into increasingly desperate battles. Pilots adored the Mustang. It was fast, stable, and deadly. Luftwaffe aces who once ruled the skies suddenly found themselves hunted. One German pilot described the shock of facing the Mustang. It was like fighting a ghost. It was always there, no matter how far we went. The impact was immediate and decisive. The P-51 Mustang didn't just protect the bombers, it cleared the skies. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. German fuel shortages, inexperienced pilots, and relentless Mustang attacks turned the tide of the air war. Britain never expected that the fighter they once considered limited would become the decisive weapon of Allied air power. The Mustang had changed everything. But how did this transformation really unfold? How did a plane that began as a stopgap design become the most feared fighter in the world? And why was Britain so surprised by its success? In the chapters ahead, we will dive deeper into the untold story of the Mustang, from its design challenges to its combat triumphs, from the courage of its pilots to the shockwaves it sent through the Luftwaffe. This is the story of how Britain underestimated the Mustang, and how the Mustang rewrote the rules of the skies.
The transformation of the P-51 Mustang into a legend begins with one critical decision: the choice to merge American design with British engineering genius. When the first Merlin-powered Mustang took to the skies in late 1942, test pilots immediately knew something extraordinary had been born. The once average fighter, limited to low-altitude missions, suddenly became a thoroughbred predator. With the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engine, the Mustang could now reach altitudes over 40,000 feet, matching or surpassing the Luftwaffe's best. Its range, extended with drop tanks, allowed it to fly deep into enemy territory, a capability no Allied fighter had possessed before. This was the moment Britain realized the very aircraft they had underestimated was about to become the cornerstone of Allied air strategy. Bomber Command's Dilemma. By 1943, Britain and America were pursuing very different bombing strategies. The Royal Air Force RAF conducted nighttime raids, relying on darkness to protect their bombers. The United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, insisted on daylight precision bombing, striking factories, railroads, and oil refineries with surgical accuracy. The problem for the USAAF was survival. Without escorts, daylight raids turned into bloodbaths. The German Luftwaffe tore through bomber formations with swarms of Bf-109s and FW-190s. Some missions saw losses exceeding 20%. At that rate, the daylight bombing campaign was unsustainable. General Spaatz and General Jimmy Doolittle knew the answer. They needed a fighter that could go the distance. The Spitfire was superb, but too short-ranged. The P-47 Thunderbolt was tough, but still couldn't escort all the way to Berlin. Only the Mustang, with its incredible fuel efficiency and drop tank capability, could carry the bombers safely to the Reich and back. The British, initially skeptical, soon admitted that the Mustang was the missing piece of the puzzle. First combat successes. In late 1943, the P-51B, the first Merlin-powered production Mustang, entered combat over Europe. Almost overnight, the balance of air power shifted. Bomber crews who had once braced themselves for waves of German fighters now looked up to see Mustangs flying beside them, ready to meet the Luftwaffe head-on. The morale boost was enormous. On December 20, 1943, during the famous raid on Bremen, the Mustangs escorted bombers deeper than ever before. When German fighters attacked, the Mustangs pounced with devastating results. Luftwaffe losses were heavy, and for the first time, the Germans realized their dominance of the skies was slipping. Shockwaves in the Luftwaffe. For the German High Command, the arrival of the Mustang was a nightmare. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, famously admitted, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." The Mustang's long range allowed it to do more than just escort bombers. Doolittle changed tactics, ordering Mustang pilots not to stick tightly to bomber formations, but to hunt down German fighters wherever they appeared. Suddenly, the hunters had become the hunted. Luftwaffe aces who once ruled the skies found themselves outnumbered and outperformed. German losses skyrocketed, not just in machines, but in experienced men, pilots who could never be replaced in time. Britain's realization. By mid-1944, Britain's view of the Mustang had completely transformed. The same aircraft they had once dismissed was now the shield protecting their bombers, the spear piercing deep into enemy skies. British pilots themselves began flying the Mustang with pride. RAF squadrons equipped with P-51s carried out escort missions and long-range sweeps, working hand-in-hand with their American allies. It was a stunning reversal. Britain had never expected that an American design powered by a British engine would reshape the entire air war. Yet, here it was, the most effective fighter of the Second World War. The Mustang in D-Day and beyond. By June 1944, when the Allies launched Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, the Mustang played a critical role. P-51s swept the skies clear of German fighters, provided air cover for landing troops, and struck railways, bridges, and fuel depots to choke off German reinforcements. The Luftwaffe tried desperately to resist, but was crippled. Allied air superiority was overwhelming, and the Mustang was at the heart of it. The skies over Normandy belonged to the Allies. And yet, the Mustang's story was far from over. In the final year of the war, it would deliver crushing blows to Germany's last desperate attempts at resistance. By early 1944, the P-51 Mustang was more than just another fighter plane. It was a symbol of hope, a shield for bombers, and a sword striking directly into the heart of Nazi Germany. But the true measure of its impact was only beginning to be seen. The Mustang strategy. When General Jimmy Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force in January 1944, he changed the way the Mustang was used. Before, escorts were tied tightly to bomber formations. This meant fighters couldn't fully exploit their speed and agility. Doolittle tore up the rulebook. His order was clear: if you see the Luftwaffe, go after them. Leave the bombers. Break their back. This unleashed the full fury of the Mustang. No longer limited to a defensive role, Mustang pilots began sweeping the skies ahead of the bombers, attacking German fighters before they could even approach. It was aggressive, it was risky, and it worked. The Luftwaffe, already stretched thin, now faced relentless assaults from Mustangs at every altitude and every angle. Their carefully planned ambushes turned into chaotic running battles. The German fighter force began bleeding to death. Big Week. In February 1944, the Allies launched Operation Argument, better known as Big Week. The goal was simple: cripple German aircraft production and lure the Luftwaffe into battle. Wave after wave of American bombers struck factories across Germany. The Luftwaffe had no choice but to respond. For days, the skies turned into massive, swirling dogfights. At the center of it all were the Mustangs. With their range, speed, and maneuverability, they dominated the engagements. German losses were catastrophic. Hundreds of aircraft were destroyed, but more importantly, hundreds of experienced pilots were gone, men the Luftwaffe could never replace. Big Week was a turning point. The Luftwaffe was no longer the hunter, it was the prey. Mustang pilots, the new aces. The Mustang quickly earned a reputation as the pilot's fighter. Its handling was smooth, its visibility excellent, and its performance unmatched. American pilots loved it, and soon the Mustang was producing new generations of aces. Names like George Preddy, Bud Anderson, and Chuck Yeager became legends. Preddy, flying his P-51 Cripes Mighty, became the top Mustang ace of the war, with 26.83 confirmed kills. Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier, cut his teeth flying Mustangs over Europe. One pilot described the feeling of flying the Mustang as, "She was fast, she was beautiful, and she could take you anywhere you needed to go." If you had a Mustang, you had a chance. For bomber crews, seeing the long-snouted silhouette of the Mustang sliding into formation beside them was like a guardian angel arriving. Morale soared. Missions that once felt like suicide now had hope. The fall of the Luftwaffe. As 1944 wore on, the Luftwaffe's decline became irreversible. Fuel shortages crippled their ability to train new pilots. Allied bombing raids, protected by Mustangs, destroyed factories, railways, and refineries. Every month, fewer and fewer German fighters made it into the air. Even Germany's most advanced aircraft, the Me-262, arrived too late and in too few numbers to make a difference. Mustangs were even credited with shooting down Me-262s during takeoff and landing, when the jets were most vulnerable. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe was a broken force. Göring's once feared air arm was reduced to scattered resistance, easily overwhelmed by swarms of Allied aircraft. For Britain, watching this transformation was both humbling and inspiring. The RAF had once viewed the Mustang as a second-tier aircraft. Now it was clear this fighter had won air superiority over Europe. The Spitfire remained beloved, the Hurricane honored, but the Mustang had become indispensable. In a twist of irony, the aircraft Britain had almost overlooked became the one that secured the skies for D-Day, for the liberation of France, and for the final march into Germany. It was a reminder that innovation often comes from unexpected places. A design born in America, perfected with a British engine, had rewritten the balance of air power. The invasion of Normandy. On June 6, 1944, the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy. In the skies above, the Mustang played a critical role. P-51s patrolled the airspace, ensuring no German aircraft could interfere with the invasion fleet. They strafed trains, destroyed fuel depots, and cut off German reinforcements racing toward the beaches. The Luftwaffe, battered and broken, could do little to stop them. Allied air dominance was overwhelming. The invasion succeeded, and the liberation of Western Europe was underway. For many soldiers on the ground, the constant presence of Allied aircraft gave them confidence. The skies were theirs, and the Mustang was a key reason why. Beyond France. After Normandy, the Mustang's role only grew. As Allied armies advanced, P-51s ranged ahead, hunting anything that moved on German roads. Tanks, trucks, trains all became targets for the Mustang's 6.50 caliber machine guns. The Mustang was not just a dogfighter, it was a scalpel of war, cutting German logistics to pieces. By late 1944, the Allies had achieved total air superiority, and yet Germany would make one last desperate gamble, the Ardennes offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. There, once again, the Mustang would prove decisive.
The Battle of the Bulge. December 1945, the bitter cold of winter descended on Europe, and Hitler launched his final gamble. The Ardennes offensive, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. In a desperate attempt to split the Allied armies and seize the port of Antwerp, German forces surged through the snow-covered forests of Belgium. The Allies were caught off guard, and for a moment, the war hung in the balance. But Hitler's gamble had a fatal flaw. He counted on bad weather to ground Allied aircraft. For days, heavy fog and snow kept Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and other Allied planes on the ground. German tanks and infantry pushed forward, threatening to tear a hole in the Allied front. Then, on December 23rd, the skies cleared, and the P-51 Mustang roared back into action. Hundreds of Mustangs swept into the skies over Belgium, striking German convoys, tanks, and supply lines with merciless precision. They strafed roads, blasted fuel depots, and cut off reinforcements. The German offensive, already strained, began to collapse under the relentless attacks from the air. For the soldiers on the ground, the sound of a Mustang's Merlin engine overhead was a sign that help had arrived. The Luftwaffe tried to resist, but they were no longer the mighty force of 1940. Their losses were catastrophic.
By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over, and the last German offensive in the West had failed. The Mustang had once again proven its worth, not only in escorting bombers, but in shaping the outcome of battles on the ground. Hunting the jet age. As 1945 dawned, Germany introduced its most advanced weapon, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Faster than anything in the skies, it posed a serious threat to Allied bombers. But the Mustang, with its long range and numbers, adapted quickly. P-51 pilots learned to catch Me-262s during takeoff and landing when they were slow and vulnerable. Despite its advanced technology, the jet could not turn the tide. The Mustang remained master of the skies. The road to Berlin. With every passing month, the Luftwaffe shrank into irrelevance. By spring 1945, Allied bombers could strike anywhere in Germany with near impunity, escorted by swarms of Mustangs. Factories lay in ruins, railroads were shattered, fuel supplies were gone. On the ground, Allied armies surged forward. The skies belonged entirely to the Allies, and the P-51 Mustang was the spearhead of that dominance. In April 1945, as Soviet troops closed in on Berlin from the east and the Allies advanced from the west, the Luftwaffe was a ghost of its former self. Mustang pilots still flew missions, but increasingly they found empty skies. The once feared German fighter force was no more. Victory in Europe. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. Victory in Europe was declared. For the men who had flown Mustangs, it was the end of an extraordinary journey. The Mustang had started as an aircraft Britain barely noticed. Dismissed as a low-altitude fighter, it had been relegated to minor roles. But with the Merlin engine, with American persistence, and with British cooperation, it had become the most decisive fighter of the war. The Mustang didn't just escort bombers, it destroyed the Luftwaffe, gave the Allies air supremacy, and paved the way for victory in Europe. Britain never expected it, but the P-51 Mustang had changed the air war forever. Britain's reflection. For Britain, the story of the Mustang was humbling. The nation that had stood alone in 1940, that had relied on the Spitfire and Hurricane to save its skies, now acknowledged the Mustang as the key to Allied air power. It was a reminder of the unpredictability of war. A fighter born in America, overlooked at first, had risen to become the ultimate weapon in the skies of Europe. And in the process, it forged an unbreakable bond between Britain and the United States. The P-51 Mustang was more than a machine. It was a symbol of innovation, of cooperation, and of victory. Legacy of the Mustang. Even after the war, the Mustang's legacy endured. It continued to serve in Korea, in the air forces of dozens of nations, and in the memories of those who had flown it. Pilots would never forget its sleek lines, its power, and the way it turned the tide of battle. To this day, aviation enthusiasts consider the Mustang one of the greatest fighters ever built. And for Britain, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the greatest weapons come from the most unexpected places. The Mustang had begun as an afterthought. It ended as a legend.
The war ends, but the Mustang flies on. As the guns of World War II fell silent in May 1945, the Allies stood victorious. In the air, the P-51 Mustang had left an unmistakable mark. It had escorted bombers into the deepest heart of Nazi Germany, broken the back of the Luftwaffe, and proven itself as one of the greatest fighters of all time. But unlike many wartime aircraft that were quickly retired, the Mustang's story was not over. The U.S. Air Force, newly created in 1947, kept the Mustang in service for years.
It became the first-line fighter of the post-war era, bridging the gap between piston-engine warbirds and the coming jet age. Korea. The Mustang's second war. When war erupted in Korea in 1950, the Mustang, redesignated the F-51, was called back into action. Jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre were fast, but they were needed for air-to-air combat against Soviet MiGs. The Mustang, with its range and payload, was perfect for ground attack missions. Once again, the Mustang proved its toughness. It strafed enemy convoys, destroyed supply lines, and supported United Nations troops on the ground. Though vulnerable to jet fighters, in the right role, it remained invaluable. For a plane designed in 1940, this was nothing short of remarkable. A global icon. The Mustang's fame spread worldwide. Dozens of nations adopted it, from Canada and Australia to Sweden, Israel, and South Africa. Everywhere it flew, it carried the legend of the war years with it. In the post-war years, air shows around the world featured the Mustang as a living symbol of victory. Its sleek design, powerful Merlin roar, and combat record made it a favorite among pilots and spectators alike. Even today, surviving Mustangs command awe wherever they appear. Restored warbirds, often painted in the colors of aces like George Preety or Don Gentile, remind new generations of the role this fighter played in securing freedom. Britain's final judgment. Looking back, Britain's early dismissal of the Mustang seems almost ironic. The RAF had tested the Allison-powered version, found it lacking at high altitude, and relegated it to low-level duties. Nobody could have guessed what the aircraft would become once paired with the Merlin. It was Britain's own engineering genius, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, that unlocked the Mustang's true potential. In many ways, the aircraft was a transatlantic partnership. American design fused with British power. Without that partnership, the Mustang might have remained an obscure fighter. With it, it became immortal. Why Britain never expected it? Why was Britain so surprised by the Mustang's success? The answer lies in timing and perception. In 1940 and 1941, Britain was focused on survival. The Spitfire and Hurricane was saving the nation in the Battle of Britain. Anything else seemed secondary. The early Allison Mustang simply didn't impress in the role Britain most needed, high-altitude defense. No one foresaw how dramatically the Merlin engine would change the aircraft's performance. In the fog of war, even great nations can miss the potential of a game-changer. The Mustang was proof. The human side of the Mustang. More than just machines, the Mustangs were flown by ordinary young men who became extraordinary. Many were barely out of their teens, strapped into sleek fighters and thrown into the deadliest skies of history. Their courage, skill, and sacrifice gave meaning to the Mustang's power. For bomber crews, those fighter escorts meant survival. For the Allies, they meant victory. And for Britain, they meant relief, a partner in the skies who could finally carry the fight deep into enemy territory. The legend lives. Today, over 80 years after its first flight, the P-51 Mustang remains one of the most beloved warbirds in history. Aviation museums, private collectors, and air shows keep its memory alive. When its Merlin engine roars to life, crowds fall silent, knowing they are hearing the sound of history. The Mustang was more than a plane. It was a revolution in the sky. Closing words. Britain never expected the P-51 Mustang to change the air war, but it did. It transformed the daylight bombing campaign from a bloody gamble into a path to victory. It turned the Luftwaffe from hunter into hunted, and it gave the Allies total control of the skies, paving the way for D-Day, the liberation of Europe, and final victory. Born of necessity, powered by partnership, and remembered for its triumphs, the Mustang was not just the fighter Britain underestimated, it was the fighter that helped win the war. And in doing so, it earned its place as one of the greatest aircraft in the history of aviation.